There is a kind of evening in early September that feels like the last good breath of summer. The sun hangs low and orange, and it turns everything it touches into something warmer than it actually is. The asphalt, the dust, the metal of old car hoods. The air is still and just beginning to carry the first cool edge of what is coming, and if you are standing in the right place at the right moment, it is the kind of evening that makes you feel like things might still be all right. Grant was standing in that kind of evening. He was 42 years old, with close-cropped dark hair that had started going salt and pepper at the sides, and a short beard that had followed the same pattern a year earlier than he expected. He was broad across the shoulders from years of work that required it, and his white t-shirt had the particular stain pattern of someone who has spent the day in close company with engine grease and does not think about it much anymore. The sign above the bay door read Anderson Repairs in hand-painted orange lettering that had been fading on the left side for 3 years. Grant kept meaning to repaint it. There was always something more pressing. A gearbox that needed rebuilding, a customer waiting on a part that had been back-ordered, a bill that needed paying before the end of the month. He ran the shop alone 6 days a week and had been doing so since his wife left when their daughter was 5 years old. Not dramatically, not with a fight that could be named and pointed to, but slowly, the way some marriages end. Like water, finding a crack in stone and widening it over time until one day the whole thing simply gives way. His daughter Lily was 11. Now she had his eyes and her mother's ability to read a room, and she was the most important thing in his life by a distance so large it could not be measured. She stayed at the neighbor's house on long shop days, and Grant picked her up by 6 and made dinner and helped with homework, and on the good evenings they sat on the back porch after dark and counted whatever stars were visible through the tree line. Those evenings were what he worked for. It was on one of those long September afternoons, the golden kind, that the white sedan rolled slowly into his lot. Grant heard it before he saw it. The particular sound of a rim making contact with pavement is unmistakable to anyone who has spent enough time in a repair shop. It is low and uneven and slightly urgent, and it tells you immediately that someone has been driving on a flat for longer than they should have, hoping it would somehow resolve itself. He stepped out of the bay and watched the car come to a stop. The girl who got out was maybe 19 or 20, long blonde hair that she had not bothered to tie back, a navy blue sweatshirt and jeans and gray canvas sneakers, and the expression of someone who had already been having a hard day before the tire decided to make itself part of the story. She looked at the tire, then she looked at Grant, and then quite suddenly, and without any warning, she started to cry. Not the polite kind of crying that people do in front of strangers, where they apologize immediately and wave it away, but the real kind, the tired kind, the kind that has been waiting for a reason and has finally found one in a flat tire on a county road outside a town she did not know. Grant did not say anything right away. He had raised a daughter alone for 6 years, and he had learned, slowly and through many mistakes, that the first thing a person needs when they are crying is not a solution. They need to be allowed to be where they are for a moment, without someone immediately trying to move them somewhere else. He waited. She pulled herself together after a minute and wiped her face with her sleeve and told him she was sorry. She said she did not have any money on her. She said her card was at her apartment, and she had left quickly, and she did not know how to call anyone because she did not really know anyone in this part of the state, and she just needed to get home. Her name was Becca. Grant nodded once and told her to come inside and sit down. He said he would take care of the tire and that she could sort out the rest when she was ready. She looked at him the way young people look at adults who offer something without an obvious price attached, with a kind of careful disbelief that is not rude but is honest about the fact that experience has taught them to look for the condition hiding behind the offer. But Grant had already turned back toward the bay. There were 2 bar stools near the open door that he kept for customers who wanted to wait inside, and Becca sat on one of them while the September light came through the opening and laid itself across the concrete floor in long, warm rectangles. She talked while he worked. She had been driving back from a second interview at a consulting firm 2 towns over. She had not gotten the position. They had told her she was impressive, but not quite what they were looking for. which she had come to understand was a polished way of saying she was not yet the thing she was trying to become. Her mother had been pushing her toward a different path. Something safer, something that used the connections her family had built. And Becca had been resisting it not because the path was wrong, but because she needed to know she could find her own way first. And the trouble with needing to find your own way is that there are stretches of road where it does not feel like a noble pursuit. It just feels like being lost. Grant listened without interrupting. He had a daughter who would be 19 herself one day, and he found himself listening to Becca the way he hoped someone would listen to Lily when she was sitting in a strange place trying to explain the gap between who she was and who she was working toward becoming. He said at one point, quietly and without stopping what he was doing, that in his experience, the people who needed to find their own footing before accepting a hand were usually the same people who eventually built something worth standing on. He said that the ones who took the easy path too early sometimes spent years trying to go back and find the harder one. Becca was quiet for a moment. Then she asked how he knew that Grant set down the lug wrench and sat back on his heels and thought about it properly. He said he knew it because he had watched his own father take the safe offer at 26 and spend the next 30 years working a job he was competent at but never proud of. He said his father was a good man who lived a decent life, but there was a particular quality of restlessness in him that never fully went away, a sense that somewhere there was a version of himself that had made a different choice, and he would spend a long time being curious about that version. He said he had decided early that he would rather be broke and building something his than comfortable inside, something that belonged to someone else. He gestured at the shop around him, at the faded sign and the old red toolbox, and the floor that needed resurfacing, and the walls hung with tools that had each been chosen for a reason. And he said that it was not much to look at, but it was entirely his, and he was proud of every square foot of it. Becca looked at the shop. Then she looked at Grant. She said she thought that was one of the most honest things anyone had said to her in a long time. The tire was done clean puncture from a nail, the kind that happened on county roads this time of year and had nothing to do with bad luck or carelessness. It was simply the world doing what the world does, and the important thing was that it was fixed. Now Becca stood and asked him one more time what she owed him. Grant shook his head. He said to drive safe and to keep going. She thanked him with the kind of quiet sincerity that you only hear from people who mean it completely, not the reflex gratitude of a transaction, but the slower, deeper kind that comes from being genuinely seen. Then she drove away into the golden afternoon. Grant did not think about it again. He picked up Lily at 6. He made pasta, he helped with a science worksheet about the water cycle, and he sat on the back porch for 20 minutes after Lily was in bed, and looked at the stars through the tree line, and listened to the quiet the way he had learned to do. The call came 8 days later on a Thursday morning. Grant was rebuilding a brake assembly when his phone rang on the workbench. He almost let it go, but he had been waiting on a parts supplier, and he slid out and picked it up. The woman's voice on the other end was measured and clear, the voice of someone who had spent decades in rooms where composure was expected, and had eventually made it her natural register. She said her name was Margaret. She said her daughter Rebecca had told her what happened on a county road 8 days ago when her tire went flat outside a repair shop, and a man had fixed it without asking for anything, and had said something to her that she had not been able to stop thinking about since Grant leaned against the workbench. He remembered the girl, he remembered the navy sweatshirt and the tired eyes, and the afternoon light coming through the door and laying itself across the floor in warm rectangles. Margaret said she was going to be straightforward with him because she respected his time. She said she had built a supply chain and logistics company over 30 years, starting from a small import office. She had run out of a rented room in her late 20s. It was now one of the larger privately held operations of its kind in the region, and it maintained a significant fleet of vehicles across 4 states. She said she had spent 3 decades learning to recognize the difference between people who performed good character and people who simply had it. She said the story her daughter told her pointed clearly to the second kind. She said she had a fleet maintenance coordinator who had been looking for reliable independent shops to add to their service network, the kind of arrangement that meant guaranteed monthly volume, not enormous, but consistent, the kind of work that a small shop could build a real foundation on. She asked if she could send him the details. Grant stood in his shop for a long moment. He looked at the faded sign. He looked at the floor that needed resurfacing. He looked at the red toolbox that had belonged to his father and the walls of tools he had chosen one by one. Over 11 years of slow building, he thought about Lily, about the college fund he added to every month in amounts that were honest but modest, about the roof over the bay that he had been patching rather than replacing, about what steady felt like when you were building it alone. He said yes. He said he would be glad to look at the details. What came over the following months was not a transformation. It was something better than that. It was stability. 3 fleet service contracts came through over the winter. Modest in scope, but reliable in volume, the kind of work that meant Grant could bring on a part-time assistant 2 afternoons a week, the kind that let him finally replace the bay roof before the first hard freeze, the kind that freed enough of his evenings that he was home before dark on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and he and Lily started eating dinner at a proper hour at the kitchen table, like a family that had enough time to sit down. He repainted the sign in February, Anderson Repairs in fresh orange and black, and this time he did both sides. Margaret called a few more times over those months, always beginning with a practical question about the contracts and ending somewhere warmer than that, the way conversations do when 2 people recognize in each other a similar kind of quiet determination and cannot quite help respecting it. Becca came to the shop once in March. She had taken a position at a small regional firm, not the consulting company she had interviewed at twice, but a different one she had found by looking sideways instead of straight ahead. She said it was the right fit, and she had known it was the right fit from the first week, and that knowing made the difference between working and actually building something. She sat on the bar stool by the door, the same one as before, and watched Grant work for a while. She said she still thought about what he had told her about his father, about the safe offer at 26, about the version of yourself that made the other choice, and the particular restlessness of wondering about that version for 30 years. She said she had written it down the evening she got home, and she had read it back to herself on the mornings when the path she had chosen felt harder than she thought it should. She said it helped every time Grant thought about that later, after the shop was closed and Lily was at the table, drawing something in the good, concentrated silence she went into when she was working on something that mattered to her. He thought about a flat tire on a September evening and a young woman crying in a way she had not planned to, and an afternoon that had looked like nothing from the outside. He thought about how many moments in a life look like nothing from the outside. A nail in a tire, a floor, Jack, a man who decides to fix it without asking why. He thought about his father and the 30 years and the restlessness and how he had understood it even as a boy without having the words for it. Yet he thought about the shop and the sign and the toolbox that had been his father's, and the way certain things get passed forward not through instruction but through example, through watching someone make a choice, and carrying the memory of that choice into your own life and letting it shape the choices you make in rooms your father never saw. Lily looked up from her drawing and asked what he was thinking about. He said he was thinking about how the small things are usually the real things. She considered this with the serious expression she brought to questions she found worth taking seriously. Then she nodded, as if she had already suspected as much, and went back to her drawing. And the kitchen was warm, and the evening was quiet, and Grant Anderson sat at his own table in the life he had built with his own hands and felt, not for the first time, but perhaps more fully than usual, that it was enough, that it was more than enough, that it was exactly what it was supposed to be.